Hey, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday. Guess what, gang? It's a secret. Don't let anybody know this, but Megan Torrance is here with us today. Don't tell anyone.
Mic drop.
Yeah. Megan, it will be hard for us to believe that there may be folks joining us today who haven't encountered you either in the ATD bookshelf or at conferences or other places, etc. So for those folks, that small group of people who may not have met you yet, introduce yourself to them.
Sure thing. Hi, guys. It's good to hang out with you and drink coffee and dance. Yes. So I lead a fantastic company called Torrance Learning, and it's a group of learning design and development and engineering professionals spread all across the US and beyond in some cases. And we help our clients solve performance challenges in the workplace through learning, through support, through really intentional skilling of folks. A lot of that time that comes out and people would say, wow, that looks like e-learning. We think it's some of the best e-learning around, but it goes much, much deeper than that because learning is not an event, right? It's a process. And so we spend a lot of time doing that. We also spend a lot of time really deeply thinking about how we help our fellow professionals in the learning space improve their skills. So whether it's agile project management, whether it's data and analytics, whether it's XAPI, whether it's AI, right? How do we help learning professionals raise the bar and do better? So we have kind of this twofold mission or twofold way in which we come out into the world.
Awesome. And thinking deeply about is why you're here today, because you have been thinking deeply about things that emulate thinking deeply.
I had to pay attention there, but yes, well done.
And uses a lot of electricity.
So if folks haven't guessed already, we're talking about AI, which, as I noted, you've been thinking deeply about, particularly from the focus of our L&D, instructional design space, etc. We'll maybe let the cat out of the bag right away, too, that you do have an upcoming book on this, which is gathering together all of your deeply thinking about in between the covers. Folks, we'll definitely share a link, if we haven't already, into the chats with access to the pre-orders for that. Maybe tell us where you started on this deeply thinking. I mean, AI has been a buzz, but what brought you into this space of thinking about that?
Yeah, Chris, it really comes from that. How do we help L&D professionals level up? And would have been early 2023. Well, I'll tell you a story of supremely horrible timing. Data and analytics was super cool. The learning space that really followed out of my work with the XAPI cohort. I was kind of like, what do we do with all this data? So I wrote a book on data and analytics for instructional designers, and that went to press. Like my final hands touched it, and it's the last copy edit 2 weeks after ChatGPT was released. So, by time my book actually hit the shelves, nobody cared about data and analytics because everybody was making songs, limericks that sound like a pirate, that cook apple pie or whatever, right? Make recipes. So we were doing all sorts of really weird party tricks with AI and some really good, useful things with AI. And nobody was talking about data other than the data that you were putting into AI, right? So different kind of data. And I thought, well, gosh, like, how do I help? How do I help in this situation in which everybody's thinking, oh my gosh, my hair is on fire. My world is about to change. I'm about to be replaced by a machine. So I'm one of those helper people. And I thought, oh, I could write a book for L&D folks, but the target is constantly moving. So it's very hard to write a book on what to do with AI. But at the same time, I was doing a lot of work. I was both adjunct teaching at Penn State in their learning design and technology program, and facilitating classes at eCornell in management and leadership, power dynamics, and influence in organizations. So I've got these two things also happening in my world. And I realized that this was an opportunity for learning professionals to step in, kind of like we did with COVID, step in and help our organizations navigate this really, really hard place. And that was really the spark for the book is how do we have a conversation about this, about how we implement it, how we keep the humanity involved in our organizations, because it's really important. How do we look at these rapidly changing things and make sense of it and still be useful at the same time and have something that's durable and reasonable? Right?
Mhm.
Your two classes were probably bringing up AI, and there was overlap, but they were coming from very different perspectives. And you saw, there's a way that we can make this actually be productive instead of antagonistic.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. So I had at that point, Penn State didn't have its policy on student use of AI available yet. And so I was choosing my verbs carefully, right? I had the opportunity to set my own policy in class
Mhm.
and to have that as a conversation. We had it both as explicit conversation and just implicit conversation and everything that was going on, right? At eCornell, we were talking about, things like the traditional sources of power in an organization. By the way, learning and development does not have some of the most authoritative sources of power in an organization. I know you're surprised too, right? We're not at the hierarchy. The CLO rarely gets promoted to CEO, right? That's one of the questions we ask. Like, if you look at your C-suite, which function is most likely to be promoted to CEO, right? Those are the power functions. And then people are like, oh, I got that. So it's often not the CLO. But we have other sources of power. This is super, right? So learning and development people tend to have a broader and more vertically oriented network within an organization than other people in other jobs in the company. Right? Because we talk to all these subject matter experts. We talk to all these learners. We may be teaching leadership classes. Our business sponsors for our projects are senior leaders. So we have access to all these people. And by the way, if we're doing our job right, we've helped them be successful already. That helps grow our implicit power, right? And so there's lots and lots of things. We know a lot of things. Our whole job is figuring out a new topic enough to be able to teach it to other people. That's a hit we have in the way that we think. We think through processes. And when a process is designed poorly, you need more instructional design work, right? But so there's a lot of things, Paul, absolutely. There's a lot going on.
As you said, you're the person who everyone knows where the scope of their bubble that folks are in and they touch is very much smaller if you're not in L&D space there.
Yeah. So that gives us a chance to engage differently and maybe even a responsibility to engage differently. But we also come with these skills, right? Particularly those people who are in leadership roles or in facilitation roles, right? We come with classroom management skills, group facilitation skills. We know how to pull out other people and make sure everybody's having a voice. Now, like that's something that we do that we may not realize that the other functions in our organization may not necessarily do those things as well as we do. Right? We just kind of like it's the water we swim in. So all that really kind of bakes into what I call the AI implementation canvas. It's 14 different conversations to be having in the organization about AI. There are some of these conversations, really obvious ones for L&D to lead, but also we can and should participate in many of the other conversations. In some cases, just facilitating it.
Sounds like all the groups throughout the organization are thinking about AI to different levels, coming at different perspectives, seeing different needs. And as an organization, you need to find a way that feeds everyone. And L&D has a unique position of talking already to all these organizations, already being a facilitator. Of course, education is going to be part of this, but it's also of how you engage with this and effectively use AI out there. So sounds like you've set up a framework, maybe.
There's maybe a framework, right? But I mean, Paul, to your point, L&D is at this spot. Like if we're tired, like there's a reason why, right? Because we're juggling a lot of things, right? Spinning a lot of plates. I'm about to mix my metaphors horribly, but I think juggling plates would actually be very difficult. Do either of you juggle?
I'm thinking about spinning chainsaws at the moment. So
Oh,
Yeah.
you
well,
mentioned
it
like
does.
I'm
It
glad you're not
does.
juggling the chainsaws.
Chainsaws are kind of a loaded metaphor, but I
Mm.
think there's a lot going on, right? So we call them zones of impact, right? So there's one zone of impact, and it's your own productivity tools, right? So you've got your Claude, your ChatGPT, your Gemini, your Copilot, right? You're helping all your writing, and you've got your Midjourney and your other tools, right? Your Nano Banana and everything to help you with video and imaging and processing. You've got your translation support tools, right? There's all sorts of tools helping you do your job as a learning professional better. At the end of the day, the output of what you do in zone one is still the same. It's an XAPI or SCORM course, it's an MP4, it's an MP3, it's an image, it's an infographic, right? It's no longer doing AI, but it was created with AI. So how do we harness those workflows? How do we think about that work and do all the right things, right? Follow the rules, be safe with data, understand how our jobs change and things like that. Keep on top of things that move and change all the time, right? Zone two is when what I put in front of the learner is a direct AI interface, whether it's an AI chatbot or performance support coach or practice role play, whether it's an AI driven curriculum pathing or something like that, right? So part of the learning experience, we have an AI practice module, right? That we've had out at Demo Fest, and we're releasing a big project in a few weeks. So the learner interfaces with AI and gets feedback or input back, right? There's a different duty of care,
Mm.
right? Like I have an additional layer of responsibilities there, right? Zone three is when something in the business changes and I need to, like in L&D, I have to react because now people need different skills, or we need different people, or we need more people or fewer people, or we've got to move people around, right? And there's a mismatch, and now I need to respond, or at the very least, the process changed. We have to teach people how to use the new process. Okay. So that I see as zone three. I read about the three zones in the book, and a lot, like everything is pegged against which zone is this in, because it helps kind of make some order of things. At the same time, though, we're also helping our leaders. Right? So it's actually maybe a fourth zone. I haven't figured that out, but right, there's an opportunity for us to help others.
Well, and as you said, the fourth zone, and I was thinking of the three zones you mentioned, that in different departments, different ways. Of course, we're all focused with our L&D, and so I was like, oh, I can see how we fit there. But as you get into different departments, I was like, do they all have zones 1, 2, and 3, or is it just they use them in different ways, or what is the overarching guide? Because I think part of this, as you said, is the zone 4 or the lake that the zone sits in.
Yeah.
That to talk about it with the other groups.
I think whenever you're making something somebody else consumes, right? So you may be in product, right, for a SaaS company, and you absolutely have a zone 1, 2, and a 3. If you're in HR, right, and you're making something for employees, you definitely have zones 1, 2, and 3. Does a production person on the shop floor? Maybe not. They may just have zone 1, right, and zone 3. So they've maybe got a different set of environments, and finance, right? Maybe if finance is releasing us tools that we can kind of have really super smart dashboards, they absolutely do have 3 zones. There's a lot of places we can explore that.
Mhm. You mentioned 14 conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about those conversations.
The 14 seems like a lot, right? That seems like an untenable number of conversations. But I group them into 4 sets, right? So we have the strategic foundations, and it seems like that's a good place to start. And it includes things like business alignment, value proposition, right? What are we expecting to get out of this? And is it aligned with our business process, with our strategy, with what's going competitively in the marketplace, all sorts of things, right? There's a related regulatory and legal environment. AI and data protection. So even if you don't have AI regulation that are applicable to you in your particular geography, you may have just general old data protection, right? GDPR kind of data protection that's applicable. Regulation will be coming, but then there's also impacts that AI can influence on existing regulation doesn't on its face have anything to do with AI, right? Are you meeting your regulatory requirements better or different or not at all now that you're applying AI into a process, right? So how does that impact there? There's workforce impact and talent planning. Are we thinking about what this particular change has with respect to that? And then I have a bucket called AI readiness, which could be a very porous bucket. A lot of things can be put in there. What I don't have put in there is actual AI literacy and upskilling because I have that as a different bucket. So I'm thinking AI readiness, like, do we have our processes defined? Do we have good data? Do we have security around the data that we're using for particular AI processes so that we're not crossing streams, right? So it's one thing to just point your AI tools at your entire SharePoint directory, but what else is in there and what does it have access to, right? So those kinds of things all sit in that those four pieces. The first four conversations are all on strategic foundations. Are you two having any conversations like that with your clients or out in the industry as you hear people talking about those kinds of things?
Yeah, a lot of our clients have great concerns about making sure that things are in a garden, walled off. If they're going to be using AI in conjunction with our tool, really very in-depth processes for many of them in terms of vetting and approving, going through the IT team, the security team, etc. Some very involved processes on that front because there is a great deal of concern about protecting internal data, making sure that things aren't going to be exposed to the world accidentally, etc. For sure.
And then on the flip side, there's almost the exact opposite. Sometimes it's the size of the company as opposed to the biggest companies and the medium and smaller ones. It's like, of course, you turn on PowerPoint now, unless it's turned off at the system level. You got AI to help you with image generation and other things like that. And sometimes the desktops aren't as restricted or a lot of it's web-based, so you can get into it there. And people are using it all over the place. And it kind of made me think, especially that third point you brought up there, the AI readiness. I was thinking, what are some readiness things that people aren't doing and the consequences of not doing it? I'm sure you've seen some of those out there. So, because I think people can like, it generates slop and I provide something that's inaccurate. I'm also thinking back to last year, one of our clients, Wellbe, has, and you talked about the second one, they had an agent that they trained, but they did and put in a lot of their things, extra care to make sure if it did say something that was inappropriate, it could be flagged. And also people knew that they were talking with an agent that may make mistakes and stuff. But what are some of the things that you ran into with the AI readiness that was not thought about and here's the consequences of it, or was thought about but not paid as much attention or done about?
Yeah, I think something you mentioned got me thinking about, right? Just the preparing or having I'm going to use a term that sounds super inflammatory. I don't mean it, right? Clearly I haven't had enough coffee. I'm working on it. Like disaster preparedness, right? Are we prepared to handle the errors and the mistakes, right? We're about to release an AI practice module into a large audience in a very constricted and strained. It's a very, very short throw model or experience intentionally. And a couple of the things that we've had to set up for that we wouldn't have to set up if it was a regular old multiple choice module that gave you feedback that we had written months before, some instructional designer had written and reviewed with a subject matter expert. Think about all the vetting that happens with every single word in any learning course, right? So this is, there's words that will come out of this that no one has seen before, right? When it gives you feedback on your performance, it doesn't go back and forth like a conversation. It gives you feedback on your performance. So there's a couple of things. So we have set up an audit trail. So we're catching all of the data that everything a person says and everything the AI says back to them, we're capturing in a data stream. And we'll be able to pull that out. And so now we have processes in place for vetting the data stream, watching what are people doing that we didn't do in test. We had some creative folks during test, which was fun and interesting. But what are people doing, right? What are humans putting into it? How is the AI responding? Has it gone off the rails? And we will be watching it all the time. So those are new processes. We also built a kill switch. So we have the ability to very quickly turn off the AI. We have a backup in place, right? It's a pre-scripted, here's your responses. just like every other e-learning that's existed before AI, right? And so we have that in place. So those are things that are different kinds of readiness and a hypercare environment after we release a course that we otherwise wouldn't have. So those are things that ask me in July how it went.
I'm thinking that's something most training teams aren't involved with at disaster recovery. I mean, I know about it because we work at a software company, and that's part of our own systems in there. But it's great to hear you thinking about that.
Well, here's
I think about the, things like, and of course, all of that won't happen to us. We saw Grok when it, I don't remember, turned into a Nazi or whatever
Yep.
it was doing there. I didn't pay that much attention other than something went wrong. And you
Mhm.
talk about that when you get at the real world, even if you had creative testers, the real world thinks of all sorts of things and variations.
Mhm.
Humans are very creative.
No
Yeah.
kidding. If it wasn't for people, our jobs would be so much easier.
I know.
No kidding. Hearing you itemize, just that project, something that does strike me is I think most organizations are thinking AI, save time, save money, reduce staff, etc. But you just, pop the lid open on a can of worms about a whole range of things that still need to be taken care of and thought of and accommodated.
Yeah.
It becomes such a critical piece if someone is going to take that responsible perspective on a project like you're describing there.
Yeah, it's been a fantastic project for us because it's large scale, it's high stakes, and very conservative technology environment for tons of really good reasons, right? And so it's really been an opportunity for us to go over and above, and then everything else should be easy. Like everything else after that should be easier.
Mhm.
So that covers, like, if we think about the AI canvas, that's strategic foundations. All that's strategy. There's a lot of execution on that, right? But those are strategic thoughts. A lot of time people are thinking about technology and the technology infrastructure, right? So we talked about, you mentioned target security and data and stuff. In our on the canvas, the technology also for us includes the experience. So we're looking at the user experience in the workflow. And in the process of writing my book, I heard all sorts of stories of people where somebody brought in an AI chatbot to support call center folks, right? People on the phones, but where a fantastic example, either people are copying and pasting into a tool, or instead of, it took a while for them to learn the keystroke based and the very quick word searches to be able to navigate a knowledge base and get an answer. But now they have to ask it nicely and structure the ask and do all this additional stuff rather than just zoom in. And it actually slowed them down and didn't get them any better answers. Right?
Yeah, I was
So,
thinking
is
that
that,
would be the case.
yeah, right? So there's some just consideration for the user experience that and the actual way that the work goes down, right? Where a technology driven solution that doesn't take into consideration people is a problem. And then we have the whole governance, right? You mentioned the layers of security it takes to get something approved and released. And a lot of people are really bummed about that. But I hear people, for example, banking industry, yeah, we don't get any cool tools. Like, yeah, you have my money. I'm really kind of glad that Grok isn't running my, isn't giving you advice on what to do with my money, right? So I think there's some balance there and just conversations. I mean, I think that's the thing with the implementation canvas. It doesn't have any answers. This is an entire book with no answers. It's a book full of questions, right? What are the conversations you ought to be having in your organization? The answers will change as the technology changes, but also from organization to organization and industry to industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about customer service, I thought, I mean, one of the things, if you really know your stuff, like you said, you learn the keystrokes, you got the training on that, you can get those answers out of there quickly. And that's one of the most important things of accuracy and quickness on there. I think of AI, and I'm not even talking about the delay of responding, just reading through it, formulating a question that actually gets out there, and then reading through the stuff that's giving you all the background. And of course, you can tell it to be verbose and things like that. But yeah, training it in there to be effective. And are we in search of a problem that didn't really exist, like so many other technologies? But you talked about data, and Molly McCormick brought up a good point in the chat. There is it's more thought about risk management and need for L&D data has really been needed more than ever before to really think about that. And I was thinking, you talked about your data book and analysis. I'm like, wow. And now that data is even more desired to be fed in. But again, you mentioned GDPR, but also other regulations of, where's that learning data going? How is it being used? I mean, you're tracking it, you mentioned, for some very good reasons and making sure it doesn't go wrong. But, what is happening with that data? Are people, should they be comfortable sharing those things in there? Or what kind of parameters does an organization need to be thinking about, not only in L&D, but the whole?
Yeah. Well, and there's also considerations, Paul, if we are watching, if we're collecting and watching, if we see something alarming, what is our responsibility? And so, for example, when we were doing our back end testing, I put in some things that I was testing. What would it do with very alarming content? Realizing that my team is going to see what kinds of alarming things I might come up with, right? And so because we're reading all this stuff, I fought the urge to say, I'm just testing.
They know you're very creative.
Yeah. So, I think there's an additional duty of care here, right? This is definitely a zone 2 environment where we're putting AI tools in front of people. It starts touching on that third part of the implementation canvas that we call design and implementation enablers, right? Organizations are getting really good at experimentation and pilots. I've seen some fantastic, and that's one of the conversations, right? Some fantastic examples of competitions, right? Kind of like The Voice or, whenever there's competitions and you win into future layers of time and budget and implementation resources as your project progresses. But once you get the green light, what does scaling and integration look like? Right? So this example we've been talking about where we built a model or built this experience, but in order to scale it, we had to change the LLM it used, which meant our prompting all changed because they speak different dialects is what I call it. But right. So we needed to think about things differently as we went from pilot to scale. You can't just turn your pilot on and send the link to everybody. That's not how you scale. That's how you run into problems. And then we looked at an additional conversation in this section around measurement and impact. What do we want out of this? How do we measure it? There's some really interesting work. So, right, you can measure how often people use a certain tool. What are they doing? How many hours they spend on it? What's your usage on your licenses? Sam Rogers is doing some work with pace.work, which measures your competence and capability in working with a tool, right? Do you just take what you get, run with it? Right? Do I want 8 hours of somebody just pasting stuff into ChatGPT and copying and pasting the results out? No, that's probably not really effective use, right? So he's measuring things like, are you managing risk? Are you engaging? Are you critically reviewing the results and making adjustments? It's a super cool project. You could have him on to come here and dance and drink coffee. He actually dances way better than me. Pretty much anybody. There's a very low bar from a dancing perspective. Anybody dancing.
Hey.
Right.
You had some great moves there, but thinking about back to the data there, and years ago, an example I think I've done wrong. This is way before AI. A company I was with, they had an assessment. They vaguely said it doesn't affect your employment or whatever else, where we kind of use it for in vague term there. And you're left wondering, why am I doing this? How's this data being used? At least I was, because I knew how this type of data could be used poorly and had been used poorly by many folks that don't understand it. They latch onto a data point or something there and don't understand the context. But it seems to me that, especially that level 2, where you're having the agent or other elements where people are feeding in more data than just yes, no, I picked on a choice. But even some of that is, how's that is being used, and having a policy up front so people know, and then obviously adhering to that policy. Because I'm thinking there's all sorts of ways, especially if the data is kept, that somebody may come along, new CEO or whomever else, and decide, hey, this is a great way to use this that maybe wasn't approved before. I'm wondering if you're starting to see those types of problems crop up, or how people are handling them.
Paul, it's interesting. You and Chris and I have been having that conversation since XAPI days, right? All of a sudden, you're going to be collecting a lot more information about me. And is XAPI too big brotherish? We had no idea what was coming, right? I think that there's this additional responsibility, right? With what, if we were to borrow from Uncle Ben and Spider-Man, right? With great data comes great responsibility or something. I think there's a lot. Here's the thing. How many times have you talked to a client, right? Maybe Chris specifically in the instructional design size, is that, right. So think 10 years ago, if we get IT or legal involved, this will never get done, right? That I used to hear that all the time. Please don't call IT. This will never get done. I've also had people say, please don't call my LMS people. This will never be fun, right? And now, because of the data, because of the scale, because of the impacts we're talking about, if you don't talk to your IT and your legal people, it will never get done. Like you have to bring, like they should be your best friends. Make them brownies, do whatever it takes to make sure you're including them in those conversations.
And them some awesome training.
Yeah, exactly. And make them some awesome stuff, right? Make them heroes.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot there.
When you're kind of researching the framework, or there other pieces that you found that ID maybe hadn't been thinking about as much or was spotty that they need to be thinking about more so now, or engaging a group that they had avoided, like the IT group or somebody? Because I think the IT group certainly already has data policies and stuff.
Yep.
So, and they should be if they aren't, but they're thinking about this and engaging them. But are there some other areas like that?
In that space, IT, legal, and then the business, right? If you don't understand your business processes in your business, then you risk spending a lot of brain cycles and compute cycles on things that are not going to move the needle and solve real problems. Interestingly enough, the fourth quadrant of the implementation canvas, Paul, is where people feel the most comfortable, right? So it's our human-centered adoption and change. And so it's how do we have bias mitigation and human protection conversations, because the stakes are higher now. I'm not just cranking out e-learning, right? The stakes are higher. How do we look at change management and adoption? And L&D is often part of change management, right? We're the last mile of change management sometimes, right? We get brought in very late in a change management process, right? But there's change management, not only the work, but the ways in which we're working. So I think there's a lot of layers there. We have AI literacy and upskilling, right? So that's the logical, like, oh, we got this. We can make training, right? We've got this. And I think there's some really interesting things. I've often seen AI literacy as a risk management effort, a compliance effort. And there's some good and bad with that, right? Our compliance friends know how to make sure everybody does it. They have great pipelines and great authority to say, thou shalt everybody do this. And it's really valuable here. They get good blanket coverage. It's not enough though, right? So this gives us an opportunity to not just be cranking out e-learning and doing that initial, yes, yay, you're complete, we're done, and walk on, but rather to then say, like, how do I then apply this and get support for applying on a regular basis, right? How do I build a community around learning this thing, because it's changing all the time? So we get to flex some of those other learning design muscles that are super fun. And then that kind of touches into the 14th conversation. It's not the 14th, but one of the 14th one I'm getting to today. And it's social engagement. Right? How do we keep the people and the connections between people and the sparks between people still involved? And that's a spot. It's not just our responsibility, but we ought to be asking the question, and we're great folks to be in that. We're in a great position to be asking that question.
Yeah, I was thinking a bit about some of the things, and you mentioned bias, and everyone has bias. They come from their perspective. That's their bias there. And how over the years, we finally have started from a society and culture to realize that, and that there is bias in people, which people are like, I don't see any bias. Everything's fine in there. And then, of course, the other, at least at that time, was, well, computers are not biased. Math is not biased, those kind of things. AI has kind of changed that, but I feel that there's probably people using it like, I don't see any bias. I don't know what they're talking about. What are some things that you maybe run into that same issue, or things that you've kind of shown to give examples of that. One obvious is that the source material for the thinking is potentially biased to begin with. So
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Often the people who can least see the bias are the ones who benefit the most from it. Right. And so it's because you don't see the systems in which you operate successfully. As systems or constructs, it just seems natural to you. And that's just how our brains are designed to work. We don't think excessively about the things that seem to be working. We worry about the things that aren't working. And I think what's interesting is that when I'm able to switch the conversations, like, well, it's a garbage in, garbage out conversation, right? Do you want to make decisions based on bad information? Well, no, nobody wants to do that. Great. Let's start there, right?
Mhm.
That's a great place to start. I think the bias conversation is one in which what's important is the conversation, right? The language, I saw research, I can't find it right now. There's research that shows the general political leanings, not Democratic or Republican, but liberal versus conservative versus, focused on in-group versus, externally focused, kind of the different models fan out differently on this, just kind of your ideology perspective, which I thought was fascinating, right? Knowing that, right? Seeing that as information is really helpful to being able to have those conversations. Looking around a room as you're having a conversation, making decisions, who's not here? Oh, the people who use the system, maybe we should include them, or leaders or customers. And often we say, well, they don't know enough, they don't know what they don't know. Well, they are affected stakeholders in this and ought to be engaged.
Mhm.
I was just thinking and I knew of that, but you really illustrated there of, hey, let's take that same information, question, whatever, feed it into these, and how these answers are quite a bit different. Folks could kind of see it. I agree. I'm like, how come that's very, I don't agree with that. No, well, that's where your perspective is coming from on there. So yeah, no, I think, like you said, it's important to have that conversation and bringing in those other examples, just like you would with people examples in there.
Mhm.
Totally, totally, right. I mean, it's what's really interesting in our WISE and AI kind of ethical and responsible use framework that we use. One of them is inclusive, right? Inclusive data. I'm not talking about a DEI kind of inclusive exclusively. I'm not exclusively talking about just like good data coming in, right? And how do we solve that in a non, right? How do I 5 years ago in a non-generative AI solve for the fact that I, coming from a, white Gen X, middle class, female, Ivy League educated MBA perspective, right? How do I solve for that? Well, I talk to other people who come from different perspectives. I ask them, right, to give feedback on my work. So I can do the same thing when I have an AI generated output, is get perspectives from other people. Now, I can also ask my AI tools, like, hey, take the perspective of someone who has a different perspective than I do and run this through. And so that's an interesting proxy, probably not sufficient.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was thinking all those data points too. I mean, hey, if you just asked experts, but you are also targeting beginners, you didn't get some of their feedback.
Yeah.
Factories can be very different if they're different regional locations for any number of reasons. And, that some things may not apply. And in some cases can have serious consequences, but in other cases, definitely consequences that are not desired on it
Right.
there.
But also the opportunity to personalize learning and support people that you maybe weren't able to reach, right? The flip side here is that, yeah, maybe I couldn't offer a beginner's version of something with a non-English version
Mhm.
of something, right? Or not with a non-English, Spanish, French version of something. And I needed a language that was spoken by far fewer people at a reading level that other people didn't have. I now had the ability to do that
Mhm.
and to reach those audiences in ways that weren't possible. So there's also, it gets back to my whole thing, right? It's not the answer, because the answer will keep changing. It's the conversation that we're having around that and the possibilities it opens up.
Yeah, those groups are no longer big enough and important enough to spend that much money because the money is now maybe this much, or it's possible, wasn't possible before.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'll give you a great story. Ian Newland was telling me this at DevLearn. They used to build training for their software for a certain number of groups. And then he had a group of like 4 people in an Eastern European country who came, and they'd never had their own stuff, but they did something unique there. And he's like, oh, yeah, we can do that. So they've never had their own training and now they could. And I thought, man, that's pretty cool.
Mhm.
Inspiration.
As you've been thinking deeply on all of this in the last couple of years, has there been something that's really stood out as like something that really surprised you about all of this, either good or bad?
Mm.
Uh,
You know, the thing that comes to mind is probably not like the biggest surprise. I remember being in a meeting once and we were talking with a number of senior leaders from a client organization about a particular use of AI on a project. And everybody was super excited. But we started moving into territory that, because they were senior leaders and super smart people and really excited about what I was doing. So I was super flattered, right? So, of course, they must be smart, right? If they like what I'm doing, they've got to be really smart people. Right? And so I had this perspective, and I also wanted to impress them. They started asking questions about the AI capabilities at the time and what was going on that made me realize that in the moment, I need to be supporting them with some AI literacy and state of the technology in a very gentle way. Because I couldn't say, wow, you're a bunch of idiots. You don't know what you're talking about, right? Or where have you been? Under a rock, right? You can't do that at any level of the organization. You can't do that. But I think it was a really good reminder that the people who show up and have conversations like we're having, or who listen to conversations like we're having right now, tend to be more AI literate than perhaps decision makers or stakeholders in their organization. And so we'll have to make sure that we're paying attention to that as well and bringing everybody along. Otherwise, we're not going to get the good decisions that we need made. So
Right.
that was kind of like got to pay attention to that one, Megan.
We already have challenges explaining instructional design processes to people, right? Who come to us and say, take this PowerPoint and make it a course or whatever, which we've, I don't know, for decades have been talking about trying to change that. But then there's a whole other layer onto it too, as well. Speaking of layers and things, you're joining us shortly in the upcoming time frame for a separate webinar. Paul, do you guys have the details on that?
Yeah. So on March 3rd at 11 a.m. Eastern. So if you're Mountain Time like me, that's 9 or 8. Not too early for your Pacific folks there. Megan's joining us for an L&D Professional's Guide to AI Strategies that Deliver Results, which I think we are all tasked with in this industry. I think of, hey, at the top they're saying we must have AI and everything. That doesn't necessarily mean they're an expert. They just decided that's the direction they need to go, guidance there. And of course, what do they want from it? Results.
Mhm.
And you've talked about so many things today for me that I thought these all tie into results, and everything I'm doing there impacts the results, making them better, worse. I thought about the not having the backup. That would be a disaster result, and some of those
Mhm.
potentially and things like that. I personally am looking very forward to the session with you.
Me too. I think it'll be fun to connect with folks. Chris, you'll be there too, right?
I'll be in attendance as a listener. I won't be joining you folks in the.
You
in the
might have
active
some very pithy comments or questions, I bet.
I'm
And
totally going to be thinking deeply. You know, totally.
Or maybe asking AI, what do you
That's
think
right.
about how you're being posed?
Oh my goodness! And the book is coming out. I think you said in June officially.
Yes.
There are pre-order links, etc., that folks can do to make sure that
There's
they
a way
get-
to get it early,
they
right?
get-
Yes. If
Oh.
you're at the ATD conference in Los Angeles in May, you'll
There
get it
you go.
early. And there'll probably be a couple of sessions at the ATD conference.
I'm thinking there'll be something.
Maybe.
And Domino will be there, so of course that's why you want to come to
Exactly.
the floor. So
So I'll see you in the expo then. Yes.
Yep. Our team will be there. Speaking of Domino, we should remind folks, which I neglected at the beginning, but Idiotic Instructional Designers in Offices Drinking Coffee is brought to you, as it is on every episode, by the team here at Domino. We work really hard to empower L&D teams to develop, manage, and deliver impactful learning content at scale. Check us out. There's a link, as you would always expect, etc. Folks, thanks so much for joining us this week. Megan, thank you so much. This is, as always, anytime you join us, it's an awesome conversation. And this one's particularly timely, and it's not the end, right? Like you said, having the conversation is the key thing right now.
Absolutely. And we got coffee and dance moves.
No kidding.
and we were
How can we
not
beat that?
AI people.
We are actual human beings.
Awesome.
At least this time.
Tune in next time to see. Awesome. As always, Megan, thank you so much for joining us. This was a fabulous conversation. And folks, join us again in a couple of weeks for our next time together. And in the meantime, let's have fun. Dance on out, gang.